Welcome back to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today, we're excited to have ex-BigLaw recruiter Sadie Jones here with us to talk about ways to keep your job search and your career planning consistent while you're a law student. Your Law School Toolbox host today is Alison Monahan, and typically I'm with Lee Burgess. We're here to demystify the law school and early legal career experience so that you'll be the best law student and lawyer you can be. Together, we're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the career-related website, Career Dicta. I also run the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review or rating on your favorite listening app. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can always reach us via the contact form on lawschooltoolbox.com, and we would love to hear from you. With that, let's get started. Welcome back to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today, we're excited to have ex-BigLaw recruiter Sadie Jones with us to talk about ways to keep your job search and your career planning consistent as a law student without overdoing it. So welcome, Sadie.
Thanks for having me back.
My pleasure. Well, I think there are two ways people can go wrong on this. Either they only work on their job search and completely neglect their academics, or they focus 100% on academics and ignore the career aspects of law school. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. And I think finding that balance is kind of the biggest challenge wherever you are in law school. I do recommend your academics kind of should be prioritized first if we're just saying you have to put one ahead of the other because really your academics lead into your job search. So you would never want to sacrifice grades for the job search because it's going to hurt the job search, basically. So while I think you should prioritize your grades, you can't forget about the job search because ultimately that's really the point of law school, I think, for most people.
Right. I mean, the reality is this is a professional school. So if you get out of the school and you have had no professional exposure or professional jobs or ability to get a professional law job, that's kind of a problem. So I agree with you. I mean, I think the focus has to be on the academics, particularly, sort of early in the game. But I think people do themselves a disservice when they focus 100% on the academic aspects and never do anything to support their career. So let's talk a little bit about that balance, because I think that's right. And what do you think that looks like for each year of law school? Because I think people may need to shift their focus a little as they move through school or maybe even throughout the year.
I agree. I think it's definitely dependent on the time of year, and the time of year is different based on where you are in school. And so while I think you should always have in your head, that the point of law school for most people is to get a job, be employed, be a lawyer. There are times where you're going to focus more on the job search. So if we go through it, 1L year, the focus really starts maybe December at the very earliest and, continues till early spring for a lot of people. It's great if you have a job by January and you're done, and then you really don't need to think about it too much for the rest of the year. Or you can kind of passively network and that kind of thing. So basically it's going to be, sort of winter, maybe into early spring. And there are some people who are still looking for jobs at the end of spring. But most people it's tied up, I would say, by March at the latest. And then 2L year in a normal, non-pandemic, things haven't altered year. It's really going to be the summer that you're looking for a job. So it's going to start in July, August, and, it's just going to go through early fall. And then most people are done if they've done it the traditional OCI, looking for that kind of job. There's still going to be people who haven't found a job then, and maybe they're looking through the winter. But ideally, the 2L job search is done way before the 1L job search. It starts earlier, ends earlier. And then 3L year, there are going to be the people who accepted their job full time after their 2L summer. And then, lucky for them, their job search is kind of over for the time being. So maybe they're, thinking more big picture career planning. So it's much more passive. But if you're a 3L without a job, I think that, the emphasis really needs to be to do it as soon in the year as possible. You may need to wait because some people are trying to see, who accepted their offers. And so while you may really want to have your job tied up by fall, you may just need to be on hold with some people. So it may be more of a winter thing or even going into the spring. I would say it's just, it's less on a set schedule as a 3L.
Right. And some of this is, what you've talked about is kind of the big law hiring cycle. Obviously, people who are, interviewing for different types of positions, there may be different types of cycles. So they may be going later into the 3L year, or even in a lot of cases after graduation, because people want you to pass the bar. So I think whatever type of job you're looking for, you just want to understand what that cycle looks like.
Absolutely. And some of this is just like ideal scenario.
Right.
This is when you have, this is when it's all buttoned up. Obviously, people may be at any point during the year without a job and need one. The other important thing to remember is that, as a 1L, you're really just looking for the summer job, right? And it's not really going to lead to anything in the vast majority of cases. And then 2L year, again, you're looking for a summer job, but with hopes, for a lot of people that will lead to something down the line, whether or not that's like promised to you. There are jobs where they say like, we don't have a job offer, after this, but, we'll keep you in mind if something opens up. It's not on the traditional, like, you will have a job offer full time. And then 3L year, obviously, you're looking for the post-grad job. Or it could be a clerkship. It could be other like more temporary things that you may want to look at, 3L year. So I think like the expectations and what you're looking for is also different.
Yeah, I feel like as you move through the school years, the process kind of becomes more fluid. For 1L, it's either, you start applying in December or maybe in January, and then maybe you go to a career fair in early spring, that kind of thing. And then it gets more and more fluid as you go on.
Absolutely. And there's different challenges at different times. But I also feel like I always tell people it's never over. There's always a chance to continue applying and looking for a job. So even if it gets more challenging as time goes by, there isn't a point where you like cannot find a job. There's always a time where you can be looking and applying and trying to get a job.
When you never know what's going to happen. Like I, for example, had a 2L summer job at like a prestigious firm and then hated it and they hated me. And like, that was not a great situation. So I came back into like the 3L job market being like, all right, what am I going to do next? I guess I should get a clerkship.
And you didn't plan for that, I'm guessing, and didn't expect it to go that way and had to sort of roll with it.
I mean, I thought I was going to apply for clerkships. I just also thought I'd have like a job offer. And to be fair, I had a job offer for my 1L like firm that I could have gone to. But, basically it was not the situation that was ideal, and it wasn't really the situation I was anticipating.
And I think that's just part of it, is sort of adjusting, and saying like, what do I need to do now that I'm given, X circumstances and this is where I am. And like, I would be, as action oriented as you can be, rather than focus on like what went wrong or waste a lot of time on that.
No, I think in that case, it just made it clear that I like really, really needed to find a clerkship.
And you're motivated.
I was highly motivated. I had like nothing else to do. So I really like applied myself and got that clerkship, which was great. It all worked out. And so then I was actually looking for jobs like during my clerkship. So you just never know, this stuff all kind of, it plays out over time. And in that case, some of the firms I interviewed with were like firms I talked to earlier. So, I think this idea that you want to be kind of pursuing this throughout the course of your law school career and like making those connections, maintaining connections and that kind of thing is just not going to hurt.
Absolutely. And I think some people can also be too focused on, is this an interview for a open position, and very sort of black and white about it. That's the only person I'm going to talk to or apply to. And I really think, like you said, just laying the groundwork in all sorts of ways usually leads to something down the line or can, and you never know in what way it will. So I just suggest, being kind of like broad and open with the things you're doing, because it's not necessarily just there is an open job that I'm applying for. And I think some people miss that.
I think that's true. And the other thing is, I think you can't take a lot of this very personally. Like, I remember interviewing during my clerkship with a firm in San Francisco, and they were bringing in lots of people for interviews. Like, I saw other people interviewing. And finally, at the end of the day, one of the people said, I don't even really know why I'm talking to you. Like, I don't think we're actually hiring right now. And it was just this moment where both of us were like, what are we doing here?
Awkward.
Yeah, so like I wasn't shocked when they turned me down, but I also already knew it had absolutely nothing to do with me. They just literally were interviewing for some unknown reason.
Well, and I think, some places also, are trying to put out feelers and like figure out what they're looking for.
This was also like a smaller place, so I think they were trying to like kind of get an in with people, but it was definitely counterproductive because like it just didn't make a lot of sense. It was just a total waste of time.
Yeah, no, I see that a lot too. And you can pick and choose like what you think is worth doing. It's not like everything is worth doing either. Yeah. I think there's a balance there too.
Definitely. Well, we're going to talk about that in a minute. But before we do, let's, do you have any thoughts for people who are in law school part-time? Because we definitely get some questions. And I think this is a tricky one. I mean, on the one hand, they're already focused on a job since they typically have a day job. But I think it can be really hard to transition into a more legal job when time is really short and they can't necessarily commit to a full-time summer legal position. What are your thoughts around this?
So I think this can be a hard, place to be. And basically, you're just going to have to make some tough decisions and sort of, my advice would be, like, if we back up, you should think about this before you're applying to law school, and what makes sense between full-time and part-time, right? So if you're like, I need the income and I need to do this part-time, you have to say to yourself, okay, can I save up maybe enough that I'll be quitting my job in order to get a summer job, which I think may be the only option for some people. And I've definitely seen people do that. Like I want to go full into this by the time I get to that point in school. It can be slightly confusing because you are probably doing it over like 4 years. And so you have to figure out what your 2L summer is. There might be like options, like you could do either summer or both summers. So one option is to quit your job and go full into it. And then, maybe continue with some kind of part-time job or do something like the final year and hope that you get a full-time job offer as a lawyer. There are other people who aren't going to do a traditional summer associate situation, and then they're going to apply for things later, which is going to be challenging because you're not going to have had the same like work experience as other people where you're applying to the jobs. There are other people in that situation who are sort of on an alternative path, maybe want to get this degree, to like supplement some other degree they have. You may also be able to talk to your employer. Like maybe there is an option to still do a summer thing, maybe work part-time at your current job. Think about what the options are with what else you do and how this could possibly work with it. Or maybe like take a sabbatical. So I think there are situations, obviously not everyone has that kind of job. But I've worked with different students where they've either decided to go full into the law school thing by the time they get to that point, or, they're just going to not do that and they're going to apply for jobs later and sort of, sell themselves in other ways and market themselves in other ways. And, they're not going to kind of go head to head with the people who had a traditional path. So I think those are all the things to think about. And I just highly suggest coming up with a plan before you even go to school about how this is going to work when you get to that point, because, you can't just do things exactly like people who are in full-time school, basically.
No, I think that's right. I mean, interestingly enough, the judge that I ended up clerking for had gone part-time, and he was a journalist in DC during the day, and then he went to law school at night. So, you just never know where you're going to end up. He could be a federal judge.
And maybe he connects with people who are on the same path. Like maybe you sort of luck out where they're like, oh, I did that too. I'm totally fine with, you not having had, a summer.
No, that's really true. I should ask him if he's like Yeah, I should ask him if he's hired people who went part-time, because I would not be surprised if he actually had, because, I mean, he knows that that can work out. But yeah, I think this idea of sort of having a plan when you go in, and I've also seen it where the first 2 years, kind of people focus on doing the part-time thing, and then that kind of combines into almost like the 1L year. And then from there, kind of start transitioning more into like the legal work. And I think that can work. Yeah.
And I know people also sometimes, they go into, let's say, like OCI, they want to see, maybe I can do BigLaw. And then they basically make the decision, if I get that 2L summer job in BigLaw, then I'm going to quit my job. You can also like dip your toe in and see how it works out. There's sort of no harm in that. You don't have to tell your employer, what you're planning to do until you make a decision.
Right. And so, sometimes people too can, if you want to work during the day and keep going to school at night later, people will sometimes get, positions in a firm or a small firm or whatever, something legally related. So often you can transition into a different type of job rather than just
absolutely
quitting and doing nothing.
I think just look at the different options and sort of plan it out, basically.
Yeah, and I think you want to talk to people and kind of talk to the school about what's normal and how all this would work before committing, hopefully, to the degree.
Agreed. Also, my one other advice is you should figure this out in a way that you can explain it to whoever might hire you for the summer. If you have some kind of, way you think this is going to work with your other job, don't make it confusing or complicated to the person that might be hiring you, because I think that's just a turnoff. Anything where they need to figure it out, they're like, I might go with someone easier.
Right. If you're like, I can only work Monday and Wednesday and I can't do Tuesday, Thursday because I have my other job. It's like, okay, cool. Well, that's not going to work for us. So when you sort that out, come back.
Exactly. You need to show up as someone they can just slot in, basically. And then you figure out all the behind the scenes puzzle pieces that need to come together.
Yeah. So I think it can be tricky, but a lot of people do it. So it's not impossible.
Definitely.
All right, well, let's switch gears now and kind of talk about some nitty gritty. What types of things do you think people should be doing in their kind of job search, career time that they have reserved each week or each day, or however you think they should structure it?
Well, I always tell people, you figure out whether it's easier to schedule, let's say 20 minutes a day or 3 or 4 hours in one day a week in an afternoon, or on a weekend or something. So you figure out what you can hold yourself accountable to and will work with your schedule for how you want to do it. What you're going to be doing will be dependent on, we talked about, what class year you're in and what time of year you're in. So if you're in a time where you actively need a job for this summer, let's say, you're a 1L and it's February, March, and you don't have a job yet, then I would be spending that time just sending out applications. That's what you need to be focused on for the bulk of the time. And it really is a numbers game in a lot of situations. Not everything, but I think for the 1L job search, you need to get a lot of applications out in order to, you don't know what your hit rate's going to be for how many interviews and then how many offers you may get. So I think some people just, they hear of a few jobs and I'll talk to them and it's I've sent out 5 applications and I haven't heard back and it's so crazy. And that's just not nearly enough. And it's hard to give an exact number. It's not the same number for everybody. I try to pick something that seems like it won't be overwhelming. Because I think sometimes if you say, 100 applications, then people just get overwhelmed and don't want to do anything, rather than you say, could you get 10 out this week, and then maybe you'll beat that and you'll get 15. So give yourself, a number of applications you want to get out. And this applies to really actually any class year. If you're in the time where you are actively looking for a job, especially if it's starting to feel late in the game. And then the other activities that I think you could do then and then throughout the year is just, if I say, under the umbrella of networking, which could involve so many things. It could involve cold emails or cold calls to people at places you're interested in. It could involve looking at your LinkedIn and reaching out to like your own network or your family and friends. It could involve going to an event like virtually or in person. And all of those things are networking. And so, it could be informational interviews. And I think you can feel good about that kind of stuff. It's kind of like you feel like you did something. And whether or not it directly leads to a job, it's like you've made a relationship. And so those are the things I think you can be doing all the time. And also in the background during, your active job search time.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on the numbers, man. I clearly remember sending out on paper well over 100 letters to firms, like everyone in New York, everyone in San Francisco, my first year. I think I got one interview out of that.
Yeah.
It was just
be a really low hit rate. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, yeah, I think you definitely got to send a lot out, particularly in the beginning when, the reality is like you don't have a lot of background. So like, why is someone necessarily going to talk to you? So do you think people should really track this time or these activities, and how should they do that?
I do, especially if we're talking about active job search stuff and actually networking stuff too. And I think there's like lots of ways, whatever, makes you comfortable, like a spreadsheet. We've talked about Trello. I really like to put stuff on my calendar. And so, block off time where I know I'm going to do it and then write what I did in there. And then you can really see like the amount of time it took. And the spreadsheet and all of that, has practical purposes because you want to know when you got everything out. So, when you need to follow up. And if we're talking about networking, you definitely want to make sure, that you're responding to everybody and keeping track of who you talk to and all of that stuff. So I think it's just useful looking back. And then also you can see, like, let's say you kept track of all this for 1L year and you are doing a 3L job search later, you can be like, oh, it took me 150 applications to get that job. So it gives you an idea of like what it takes to end up with the job. And some of it's luck. Some people do just send out a few applications and something like hits there and they're done. I just wouldn't count on that. And the other thing to keep in mind is most of these applications are basically the same. So you may need to make like a few adjustments, but it is not a big deal to just like, send all of these out kind of like a robot, like just get into the mode.
Right. I mean, now you don't even have to like print them on fancy paper and put them in an envelope. Mm-hmm. You can just email that or apply online or whatever. Much easier, which also means everyone's applying for more jobs, which means you probably have to apply for even more just to get one. And I think this can be frustrating for people because you're like, I'm at a good school. Like, why am I not getting work? Well, let's talk a little bit about goals because I do think it's important, like we've said, to be realistic and also to focus on goals that you can actually can control and can achieve. So, maybe it's reach out to like 10 possible employers this week instead of get 5 interviews because you don't control if you get an interview. So what type of goals do you think are helpful to focus on?
The first goal, I think, is just to make sure you're spending like X amount of time that seems realistic per week on the job search, right? So that you have blocked off the time and you are actually following through and doing it. Because I think that's a goal, you can achieve, right? Like you can do something with that time that was like job related. So I think that's great. I absolutely agree that if you're in an active job search, you should have a goal of how many applications you're getting out. And then in addition, I would keep in mind the networking, thing. So in addition to the applications, maybe you say, okay, I want to get 10 of those out. And then I want to have either talked to or tried to talk to 3 people about their career path, in a networking way. Cold emails really do work some of the time. So I think people have in their mind that no one is ever going to respond to them. And I have not seen that at all. Like you will get a response from some of those people and it could be helpful. So I like that as a goal too, so that you're doing it like on multiple levels at the same time. And then you look back at your week and you're like, oh, I did a bunch of stuff. And that's motivating to do more the next week.
I think that's great. I think also thinking about, are there events you could be attending, whether virtual or in person, and those are starting back up now. Just anything that can kind of get you out in the community, like talking to people, because you really just never know where your offer is going to come from. And so many times, I have friends who have gotten jobs through like very loose ties. And there's data on this that most people get jobs through loose ties, not through like their close friends or family or whatever, because those are the people who know something outside of your network. So, I think you've got to focus on kind of the fundamentals, but also on expanding your reach and just getting out there and meeting people.
Absolutely. And I will say that I would say 99% of the time when people, it's late in the game and they're like, I don't have a job, they always have not done that much. There's very few people I've ever talked to who have really done an extensive job search and done all the things I would recommend that don't have a job, and it's like May. I feel like almost every single time I'll say, okay, how long have you been working on this? What have you done? And it turns out that it's almost nothing. Right. Or they've sort of psyched themselves out, I think also happens, right? Like, oh, I don't think I could get any of these jobs, so I'm not even going to apply, which that mindset makes no sense to me. Maybe don't look for the big law jobs as a 1L where there are almost none. But it's weird when people are just like, oh, I just don't even see anything that I'm qualified to apply to. Because it's like, no, you need to just apply to all of these jobs that are for law students.
Right, exactly. Because you're a law student. You're probably qualified.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I think people oftentimes take themselves out of the running. I think, too, this idea of doing it consistently over time has a lot of value, because oftentimes people are like, I can't think about this. Like, I can't deal with it. I can't deal with it. And then suddenly they want to spend 20 hours in a week and expect that to produce a job by the next week. And I'm just not sure that's realistic.
It's not. And I think people do get into that, or they get into panic mode, which doesn't help anything. I don't care how late it is. Panicking about it is not going to be useful. Like, you need to sit down and come up with a plan about what you're going to do. And I agree, realistically over the course of time, you can't just make something appear suddenly.
It's like the universe doesn't care that you need a job right now.
Exactly.
I think another thing you can make a goal is to regularly reach out to your law school career services office, because they also do not like it when people come in a panic and are like, I need a job right now. And they're like, who are you? Like, I've never seen you before. You're a 3L.
Yes. And I think that happens a lot. And people have this idea in their head, or they've heard from other people, oh, my career services is no good. I hear that all the time. And I just say, a lot of people who are saying that haven't even developed any relationships. How do they know if they're any good? Right. And really, you want them to know who you are as early as possible, because they're hearing about those last minute jobs.
Right. They're the ones who get that email from the alumni. They're like, I need to hire someone right now. And they're like, oh, you know what? Like, Alison was in last week and she's looking for something. Let me call her.
Make sure they see your face, especially if you don't have a job, and tell them, tell them what you've done. Ask them if they have suggestions. I think we've talked about bringing them baked goods, making them
you want
like
these people
you.
on your team.
Yeah. So don't badmouth them. I think that's a really common thing, and it's just not helpful. Whether or not they are really being super helpful, just try your best. And so you want them to know who you are and make sure that they know where you are in the process, because the thing to remember is it's their job to make sure you have a job. They're graded on that. So they want you to have a job for sure.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's no downside. You've already paid for that benefit of school. So just go in and build some relationships, get some help, make sure they know if you're still looking. Well, before we wrap up, I know in other contexts, we often talk about active versus passive work, and the importance of doing that high value active work, but that can also make people really uncomfortable Does that apply here? I mean, I have to imagine at some point you're going to see diminishing returns from like doing yet another resume draft, right?
I agree. Yeah. I mean, it definitely applies. It sort of depends, right, on where, I know I've said this a few times, where you are in the job search, what time of year it is, what you're looking for kind of thing. So while, you need to get a lot of applications out, right, at the beginning or when you're like actively in the job search. If it's really not leading to things, just randomly sending out your resume, I do think you're going to get a little more out of like relationships. It's always going to be better if someone or, like we said, loose ties, like a friend of a friend or, the boss of an old colleague, whatever, sends your resume to someone or puts in a good word. So I do think like you are going to have slightly more out of, the people who might know you. So if you're just sending out like a ton of resumes, I might switch to like, okay, I'm going to go back to like my network or trying to even, like I said, send emails out to like, maybe someone went to your same law school. You can find like some connection to them. Cause I always think like someone being able to sort of like know you, put a face to it, hear from you about you is gonna, more possibly like lead to something versus just like sending your resume out a billion times.
Right. And sometimes people just do like a scatter shot to like anyone who's hiring anyone who's in law school. And it's like, okay, are you really like interested in this tax job and also this like, nonprofit job? So at some point, I think if you're not getting results from that, you got to take that step back and say, okay, what would I actually be really qualified to do? What would I be really interested in? And then spend a little bit more time crafting your application for that position. I hate seeing people kind of spinning around on like resume draft 1472. And it's like, all right, your resume is fine. That's not the problem.
Yeah. And I think it's great to then like get another eye on not your resume, but like your whole, way you're approaching this.
Right.
Because there may be something that you're missing. Yeah, exactly. Like, are you applying to things that just like don't make any sense, or isn't really what you're looking for, like you said? And even though it is important to cast a wide net, sometimes I think you're casting so wide of a net that there's no direction to it, and so it's just like not connecting.
You're not even
somewhere.
throwing the net. It's just the whole ocean.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that there, like we've said, are so many different aspects of a job search. Like some is sending out applications. Some is like maybe going to events or talking to your career services or talking to, alumni networks or your personal network. There's so many different ways that I always think if you've been going in one direction, it's not working. Okay, take a different direction. Pick a different path on this and like see what happens.
Right, just give it a try. Why not? Like what you're doing is not working. Try something else.
Exactly. I agree.
All right, we're about out of time. Any final thoughts on this topic?
Basically, if we're hitting you either early in law school or when you're applying to law school, I really would give all of this as much thought as early as possible so you can kind of like make a plan and feel like you're, doing a little bit at a time, because I think that's always going to make it easier, over the long term. So even if you're a 3L, of course, there's still stuff you can do. But, it would have been better to kind of make a plan from the very beginning. And I just think so many law students forget about that. And I totally understand why, because law school is busy. And like I said, your grades come first. But I think there's always a little bit of time where you could have been doing this, all 3 years or longer if you're part-time. So that would be my advice, is kind of to like, take it in little chunks and like have been doing it, the whole time you're in school.
Yeah, it's also going to be less overwhelming that way. And you're probably going to actually be able to develop some skills because you can kind of see what works and what doesn't work. So hopefully by the time that you're graduating, you're really good at finding a job. It's not that intimidating. You've done it before.
And you'll be able to use this forever.
Exactly.
In the future.
These are useful life skills because you're going to probably not keep that very first job that you get out of law school for the rest of your career. Just throwing that out there.
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. With that, we are out of time. For more career help and the opportunity to work one-on-one with us, including on your job search, you can check out careerdicta.com. If you enjoyed this episode of the Law School Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review and rating on your favorite listening app. We would really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to Lee or Alison at lee@lawschooltoolbox.com or allison@lawschooltoolbox.com, or you can always contact us via our website contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.